Okay, so we're back and we're talking to John Chico about cloud computing, and their computing issues and strategies. And these are outtakes from John's experience with the Wall Street Technology Group up in Boston, Massachusetts, from October 5th. John, go ahead, take it away. Preparing
Sure.
the enterprise for enterprise IT for cloud migration.
Sure. When we prepare, once we get the go-ahead to move specific processes and projects to the cloud, we need to approach these cloud initiatives with some varying aspects. One is strategy. We talked about strategy in the previous segment, and it's very important to have a strategy. Having no strategy is really a bad idea. But then you have to talk about governance, and governance says, are we looking at all our data and processes in the correct way?
Okay.
On top of that, we have security and compliance, which everybody is heard about ad nauseum, and development. Well, we don't just move existing processes to the cloud. What needs to be redeveloped? What needs to be reworked? What needs to be re-architected? There's a lot of different issues that we get into that aspect. And finally, we talk about infrastructure and operations. Now you have your IT group, which has moved or offloaded a lot of these processes to the cloud. Well, there's still a need for infrastructure and operations to manage this, and it's you're not really saving a lot of headcount by moving to the cloud. You're just kind of reassigning their responsibilities.
Yeah.
Uh, you know,
Redeploying maybe.
yeah,
Yeah.
redeploy.
Yeah. Okay.
Um,
So
now, okay.
there are two main points in cloud migration. Why don't you step into them?
So yeah, I mean, I've heard a ton of these great quotes from the seminar. Our blog will have the quotes with the proper
Oh
with
yeah, yeah,
with the
yeah.
proper
We'll attribute correctly.
attributions. But one of them was very nice. It says you don't buy the cloud, you don't buy for the cloud, you build for the cloud.
Okay.
It's again a way of thinking. When you're trying to justify, you're not justifying buying cloud services. You're justifying moving your processes and making your processes better. And we talked about this before, that most successful organizational uses of cloud have a mix of cloud delivery models. What that means is that not everything fits into that square hole. Maybe you need different. Again, a migration path where you start off with a cloud model, because it does cost money, and find out what processes, or determine what processes go into that model, but not try and fit all your processes into that model.
Right.
Have a strategy to migrate to different models.
Well, that means you'd have to have knowledge of what the models themselves are, what their expenses are, what their benefits.
And not only that, you have to have really in-depth knowledge about your own processes.
Yeah.
And
Right.
and
And that's where the business managers really come in. What's
Sure,
important.
sure.
And it gets into that whole thing of data classification too.
And we'll get into that. Data classification is a pet peeve of mine, because for every vendor out there that has some great security product, it all depends on data classification. And
Right.
that's the one thing
And
a lot of companies,
how granular you can get into
a
that.
lot of companies, federal government does it great. In fact, they have overclassification, which we'll talk about too. But a lot of companies don't do proper data classification, and
Okay.
that leads to a lot of problems. You don't, and when we get into security, we'll talk about that. But the cloud, you don't build new paradigms for the cloud. You have to kind of extend the paradigms you have. If you don't have a data classification strategy, starting one when you're starting a cloud migration is not the right time to do it.
Yeah.
Because it just really takes an enormous amount of assessment and planning to just before you even get to the I want to buy an Amazon EC2 resource.
Yep.
Outside of data classification, we also have something called access control, identity management.
Right.
There's a different spin that you have to take a look at for cloud, but if you don't have a robust access control mechanism right now, this is not the time to
To
do
start
it.
one up.
And finally, the workflow. There's something called workflow pipeline visibility. That means, do you know what your process does from beginning all the way to the end? A lot of companies don't have that, and they're looking to the cloud to help them do that. Again, we talked about that business
Yep.
business intelligence, and
Yep.
but if you don't have that visibility now, the cloud's not going to give it to you.
No.
So
no.
again, the cloud does moving to the cloud does a lot of things, but it doesn't magically add these attributes. So what kind of assessments do we talk about? Well, we talked about it before, your application assessment. Look at your latent capacity. If a process doesn't have latent capacity, or that process runs within its capacity in a well-defined manner, maybe not a candidate for the cloud. Maybe if
You really got to know your systems here.
Oh, yeah.
You can't just assume that you're just going to automatically just shift things over to the cloud.
Sure, and you talk about frameworks. Does your framework does it need to be reworked, or does it need to be abandoned? And abandonment is not a bad thing. Abandonment allows you to rethink the same problem in a different way. And again, go back to mobile apps. These mobile apps now, if you've reworked your framework to work with mobile apps, all of a sudden you have these new ideas that come out of it.
Well, it could be time for the guys in the CFO's office to say zero-based budgeting. Start from the very beginning.
Yeah, I don't think that would happen, but
No, but
it's an ideal. Yeah, it's an idealistic.
It could for some applications.
Yeah.
You never know.
Yeah. Okay, so if you were to do, let's talk quickly about the different cloud models.
Yep.
If you were to do that private customized cloud, that's very attractive because you're not spending any money outside. You're really doing a lot of in-house work, and you have your IT pool of talent already knows your internal systems. But the cloud, private customized cloud is not simply virtualization. Virtualization is a part of it, but just virtualizing your existing systems isn't a private cloud. You need to have all these layers of management on the cloud, which you need to end up building yourself.
Right.
So doing it internally actually becomes a lot more expensive in terms of money and time for resource management, service management, access management, usage management, building metrics. So there's a lot of issues. And we talk about usage management. One good point here is that consumers will use as much as you give them.
Yes.
Yeah, a dog will eat as much as you feed them. And so you have to make sure the cloud works properly, or resource management works properly. You have to have a usage chargeback system. And the two main systems out there today traditionally have been goods models, where as you need resources, you just give it to people, and that's what we call the Marxist approach. And the services model, which is kind of that whole net neutrality thing. You give people resources on their ability to pay. And
Okay.
if I don't know if you're familiar with the net neutrality.
It has some advocates. And
This is a similar
Yeah.
argument, and the same issues arise. Why should the departments that have the biggest budgets
Right.
get the most out of the cloud? And
Well, there's a lot of discussion on that. That gets into a lot of different political conversations as well, and I guess we won't go there for the segment.
No, this is again a high level overview. You could dive deep into every single one of these items.
Oh, without a doubt.
So.
All right. So did we cover that completely?
I think we. I mean, there's. Again, feel free to again look at the blog to see all the attributions for all these pieces and some more details.
And
But
and if you want to, you can ping John or myself, or just leave comments up on the blog, and John will be a contributor on the blog, so I'm sure he can go back and forth with you on some of the information that we found out there.
and we have a lot of resources. Again, I pretend to know nothing, or I don't pretend to know too much. But whatever I can't answer, I can get you the proper resources to answer. Again, the Wall Street Technology Association and InfraGard have members that are very well versed in these areas. So if you have a specific question, a specific need, contact InfraGard. They'll put you in touch with the right people.
Okay. We'll be back right after this